Ladies and gentlemen, this is Joe's Classic Video Games back with another cool arcade game video for you this evening. We have been working on this beautiful Atari GRAVITAR arcade game that a customer brought us. The monitor does not work. So we did a video earlier where we worked through all of the power supply just to check everything, make sure everything was right. And we checked this thing up, we checked this thing down, every single little voltage is there. And you can hear the thing playing and all of that, but you cannot see the monitor. Well, when last we messed with it, if you didn't see that video, at the very end, we were able to get the game to display on an oscilloscope. Since it's a color vector game, you can hook a vector monitor up to an oscilloscope, or at least the output of the board to an oscilloscope, and actually watch it play on the oscilloscope. So if you didn't see that, go check it out. But basically, by doing that, we pretty much proved that the problem is on the monitor. Now, whenever the game was brought to us, the high voltage cage, the high voltage section of the vector monitor, had been removed from it. So, of course, it wasn't up and running because half the monitor wasn't in there. The other half of the monitor is new replacement parts. So let me show you what we're working with. And what we're going to try to do in this video is repair the high voltage cage, which I believe is where the problem lies. So here's what we've got going on. Now you're going to love this. Look, folks, it's fine. Don't worry, it's fine. Don't worry about it. So this has the All-in-One. I guess that's a play on all-in-one. It has the All-in-One replacement deflection board. And then it also has the All-in-One updated transistor pack, we'll call it. So I've never used that. I usually just rebuild the original board that was in there. But like I said, whenever you had the game brought to us, this wasn't in it. This was in came with it out of the machine. So we need to put that back in. I've got it hanging here very carefully. Nothing's twerked or tweaked. Everything's fine. Don't worry about it. Because I want to be able to test some of the stuff on the board easily, and whenever it's mounted up in here, it's a little harder to get to. Also, a lot of the screws are missing out of the setup. Like I said, this was out of the monitor. So as long as you do this carefully, you don't want anything shorting, you don't want to pull on anything too tight, you can test it like this. So I had to do a little research on this All-in-One board, and I didn't know much about it. So this is a slightly redesigned deflection board for the Wells Garner 6100. If you're unfamiliar with this monitor, basically this is the famous, or one of the famous, color vector monitor that was in Tempest first, and then was in Star Wars, and this GRAVITAR game, and Major Havoc, and several other ones. So this is a very desirable monitor. People love the vector games. The early vector stuff was stuff like Asteroids, which was black and white. This is a color vector game, so it's just the bee's knees whenever it's working. The problem with them back in the day is they've screwed up a lot. So there were problems with the design of the deflection board, and then also the way that the transistors on the cage would burn up. So whatever, you know. This company has made a brand new deflection board that this customer has bought and put in his machine. Why would you do that? It's because they've attempted to fix some of the problems that the original had. So one of the things that they have done, I don't really know how they pulled it off, because I looked online, I couldn't find the schematics. I think that stuff comes with the board, but the customer didn't bring us that stuff. I couldn't find the schematics online, and I couldn't even find the installation instructions online, but I did find some videos about it. The low voltage area of the board has been completely removed. And normally, I believe that makes a negative 27 and a positive 27, something like that, that it sends over to this high voltage cage, and it uses to create the image. We're going to look in the schematics here in a minute, but somehow this board is doing that without that. Doesn't need it. Okay, so it's a replacement deflection board. Now you also have this little baby. So One of the problems with the original design was those transistors that mount on the chassis. There's a couple more over here, you know. They would burn up. So if you got in this, sometimes they would do it just from age, sometimes they would do it from heat, sometimes they would do it because something failed on the monitor, something could even fail on the game board and make it do it. It originally was very costly to repair too, because those transistors were not cheap back in the day. Now we're to the point where they're like $5 a piece, so if you burn up a bunch of them, it's not the end of the world, but it's frustrating to people trying to keep something like Tempest up and running, you know. So what this is it replaces all of those transistors with transistors that are mounted to a big, huge heat sink, right? Now, I do not know these people. They are not paying me to tell you about this or anything. And I don't really like reviews. I don't like whenever people do reviews of things because it's always so fake. I mean, one way or the other. So I'm just describing what we've got here, right? And so I have very little experience with these. This is the first one that I've messed with that has these on it. But when I first got it, the wiring was plugged in like, if I don't break something, like that. Okay, now you might say, well, why are you moving the wiring around? It's because of the way that the original monitor was designed. There are 3 sets of transistors, but they're actually all the same transistor. So what they've done, and it's kind of an interesting idea, is they've mounted them all to this big, huge heat sink and then put a big fan on the bottom of it so that you keep them cool. And so the wiring up here, it doesn't really matter which one of these 3 connections you plug it into because there are 3 identical sets of transistors. So it can be on either one of them, right? I suppose if any of these transistors were ever to fail, the way it's set up now, you could just skip that one, but I don't believe that's going to happen. But anyway, my whole point is, since this new board doesn't have the low voltage section, it doesn't need the 3rd set of transistors. That's why we only have 2 sets of wires hooked up. It took me a while to figure that out because, like I said, the gentleman didn't bring the instructions with us, and I've never seen one of these before. But I sussed it out, okay? You'll have to excuse my voice. I had laryngitis. I've been getting over it. So this board doesn't need the low voltage section, and you have these 2 harnesses that plug into this transistor pack. What that does is it makes it where you don't need these transistors. So you have 3 of these plugs that no longer need to be plugged in. So here's one set of 3, of 2. Here is another, a second set of 2. And here is another, a 3rd set of 2. So none of those need to be plugged in because we're using this instead. All right. When I first got it, I thought, well, maybe that's our problem. But I don't think it is. I think that board is probably going to run just fine. I haven't checked these fuses or anything. I looked into it a little bit, and I was operating, because I saw a video of someone with theirs plugged in different. Once I figured out that they can be plugged in any place on it, it makes a lot more sense what they were doing. Okay, so the whole point is we are now up to, we need to test this high voltage cage. Okay, so let's look at the schematics, and I'm going to show you how to test one of these monitors. Let me also just point out here at the beginning that I've got the board unplugged. And the reason for that is just out of an abundance of caution, because this board is worth several $100s. It would be hard for the monitor to screw up that board, but we're also dealing with something where they've been swapping parts out and moving stuff around. So if there's a wire connected wrong or something, it might happen, and I don't want that to happen. So for now, we're going to try to get the monitor to work without it getting a signal, right? So let's look at the schematics, and we can see how to test this and how to figure out what's going on with it. All right, so a bunch of wiring comes up from the bottom of the cabinet on a 12-pin or a 15-pin connector, right? So there are the signals for the X and the Y circuits, the signals for the colors, and some of the power comes up through this thing. And the wires come out of that, and they go all over the place. So many of them go onto this deflection board, which has a low voltage section that creates some voltages. And then you can see here there is a connector P100 that has a 2N3716 and a 2N3792 plugged into it. There is a P700 that also has the same setup, and there is a P600 that also has the same setup, right? So one of these is used to make the X deflection, one is used to make the Y deflection, and one is used to make the low voltage section of the board. So once that happens, it sends voltage over here to our high voltage unit. So the high voltage unit is the only part of this monitor that's still installed that's original. It's been recapped and things like that, which is usually what you need to do to get the thing to work again, but apparently that didn't get it working. So now we got to kind of troubleshoot it. So the best way to troubleshoot these monitors is at this connection right here. J900, P900. So it's the socket P900, or the pins, and J900 is the connector. If you look, there's a very easy way to test everything right here. So pins 7 and 8 are both negative on this, 27.7 volts. That may be higher or lower, but you want it somewhere around through there, right? Now you will have a complement to that over here. Pin 1 and pin 2 will be 27.8 volts positive. Now, this is negative 27.7, that's 27.8. You would think, since they're being so precise, that it needs to be perfect and precise. It doesn't. It doesn't have to be exact, right? So you just need to be in the ballpark. They're just being precise because on the stuff that they were designing, whenever everything was perfect and brand new, that's probably exactly what the voltage was. You've got to keep in mind too that we live in an age now where the voltage coming out of the wall, the AC voltage, is higher. So all of these voltages, it's not uncommon for those to be much higher now, you know. So if it said 35 up to 35 or so, that's probably okay. All right, so you can check that voltage there, and you have a ground connection right here on pin 3. But see how it shows you that it's on chassis ground? You can also use the frame of the monitor to check that ground, right? So between this connection and this connection, you should have 27.8 or something like it. And between this ground connection and this connection, you should have a negative 27.7 or something like it. Okay, and then the only other voltage that we're really concerned about is this one on pin 5. Now this one's a little trickier, but if you follow the schematic, you see this line goes down here, and it goes around this way, and it's labeled as the video B+. So it goes around, and it should be, oh, we're off the screen. It should be 181 volts. Okay, so I'll just tell you, I plugged the thing in earlier. I don't have any high voltage, so I think this B+ is going to be screwed up, right? Nothing, the flyback didn't seem to be working. Nothing's on the screen, so I think we've got problems in this high voltage unit. That's why I'm doing the video this way. So we're going to measure these voltages, and we're going to measure that video B+ voltage and see if it's anywhere near the 181 or whatever it just said. And we'll go from there. So if for instance, our negative 27 is missing, now that is an input. It's coming from that deflection board, the brand new deflection board. If that's missing, that could be our problem. If this one's missing, that could be our problem. Or if the B+ is missing, that could be our problem. So let's see if we can measure any of those. All right, so I've slightly spun this. This connection here, again, would have been on the deflection board if the original deflection board was in it. And I don't have the screws to mount this yet, so I'm going to have to find some screws if we get the thing fixed. The capacitors have already been replaced. It appears that didn't get it going. So I've turned it around. You don't have to do this, but since it's already out of the machine, it's easier for me to do it like this. We have the anode plugged in. Right, I think everything's cool. The neck board's on. The big 15-pin connector is plugged in. The wiring is all going where it's supposed to go on the deflection board. They also don't have screws in the deflection board. Look, folks, I take them as I find them. All right, we can fix it. So here is that connector that we were talking about. Now, if you look, you can see that 2 of the pins are connected together. That's either going to be your positive 25 or negative 25. And then the 2 over here are also connected together. That's going to be the complement. The black is going to be your ground. And then this orange one is going to be the video B plus that we were talking about. Okay, so I'm going to turn it on and we'll see what happens. Again, I've got the board unplugged. So the noise you're hearing is this fan on this new transistor unit. That's how they're trying to make the thing more reliable. They've got a big, huge fan on it. I say good for them. It's got an LED on it. I assume that's the spot killer LED. So basically, the original design of the board was, if it wasn't getting a signal or a proper signal from the game board, it would turn on what it called the spot killer LED. Now the purpose of that was, it makes it where the deflection board is not outputting video to the tube, because if this wasn't telling it to move the beam around, the beam would just stay focused right in the middle of the tube and burn a hole through the mask on the back of it, so that you would permanently have a little black spot in the center of your monitor. So that's supposed to be on. We don't know if this board is working properly. I'm just assuming that it is because it's new, But you know how that goes. But I think it probably will. The customer said that he had used those before, and that everything worked good for him. So we're going to roll with that. It's fine, but we'll find out later. So now I have to carefully check these voltages. So we've got plus 35 on the one end and negative 35 on the other end. So somehow they are creating that voltage with this board without having a low voltage section like the original did. And that's just how it's designed. I don't know anything about it. That's just how they've done it. So, so really the only other one to check on the ground I have just attached to the chassis. The only other one to check is this B plus. Yep, I figured that. Yeah, so the video B plus is really low, so it's not high enough to turn on the flyback, or because the flyback's not being turned on, it's not creating the B plus or whatever, however that works. So we have found what the problem is. Now we just got to figure out how to fix it. So this should be 180, but it's 33. All right, so here's that area of the schematics again. We are basically testing right here, and we're getting 33 volts. Now if you look, there is a 150 volt Zener diode right there that helps this happen. And on the other side of that Zener diode is in fact 33 volts. So you might be tempted to think, oh, that Zener diode's bad. Well, it could be, but I tested it when we had it out of the machine, sitting on the bench, and it tested fine, but that's not testing it under a load. But it would basically have to be shorted or just not working at all for it to work like that. I'm not positive that's what's going on. Over here we have, so this would be the output of that voltage. You've got a diode here. It seems like it's fine. This resistor seems like it's fine. All these transistors I checked on the bench, they all seem fine. So I think what we're going to do next, there is a timer, a 555 chip in the cage. I think we're going to check that. Now if you notice, these schematics are excellent. They show you all the voltages that everything's supposed to be. So I think we might be able to cut the design in half by just seeing if we get anything that looks proper on this 555. So we could check, pin 6, it looks like has negative 19. This is the negative 25 down here. Negative 19, pin 2 has it as well. Pin 7 has the same thing. Oh yeah, they're all tied together. It doesn't say what pin 4 is supposed to have. Pin 8 should have negative 12.5. Pin 1 should have negative 25, and then pin 3 might be the output. Maybe you've got something going on there. So if we test these signals one at a time, we might be able to see one's missing, you know. And so like if one of these is missing, then it'll tell us our problem's back here. If one of these voltages is missing, it'll tell us that the output of the 555 might be the problem. So I think that might be a good way to cut it in half and just see if we can figure out what's going on. Basically, this feeds into these two transistors, which are attached to this transformer, and this is the hot horizontal output transformer. It also tests fine with a meter, but who knows, right? So I'm just going to look at some of these voltages and see if anything is way off, is missing, you know, is supposed to be 25, but it's 0, things like that. It's really possible for a transistor to test just fine when you're using a meter like the diode check and stuff, but for it to be bad in circuit. I mean, once juice is running through it, basically. You can do a very basic test on the flyback by just checking to see if you've got continuity. So you can check between pin 3 and 6, and there should be some kind of continuity because it's just a wire, right? A coil. And then between pin 6 and 9 should also be connected. Pin 9 and 3 should probably be the sum of 9 to 6 and 6 to 3. But that doesn't really test the flyback. You're just testing to see if there's something obviously wrong, like a winding's broken inside of it or something like that. So let me check out some of these voltages that I was just talking about, and we'll see if we can track down the next problem. But clearly our problem is the video B+ isn't there. All right, folks, so I have printed out the schematics, and we're trying to see if this 555 is in fact working. It's very important that it is, or you won't get your hot to work. So checking voltages, I looked up the spec sheet of a 555. Pin 1 is the supply voltage. And so it's negative 35 instead of negative 26. But again, it's because of the replacement board. It just works differently. That voltage is coming from the deflection board, which is brand new. So it's actually about 9 volts too high. Okay. So over here, pins 2, 6, and 7 are all basically tied together. The one has the resistor, but they should be negative 19. But I said 9 volts too high. 9 volts too low, actually, right? Amplified 9 volts. So you've got the same thing going on there. It's about 9 volts off. So we've got negative 28. This 5, you've got negative 35, just like you do here. All of these, right? So pin 4 is some kind of reset, and it's at 0, but I think it's supposed to be at 0. Right. You have an LED here, which is this high voltage trip adjustment. This runs that. So that's how they disable the output of this chip to turn off the high voltage. So I think it's supposed to be 0, right? Right here we're supposed to have negative 12.5, but again, we're about 9 volts too low. We're at negative 21. This Zener diode, on one side it's got negative 35, because again, everything's too high. And then it drops at 13 volts, or raises at 13 volts, everything's backwards. And so now we've got negative 21 on this side of the Zener diode. It's a 13 volt Zener diode. It's working properly. So all of these voltages are off, but they're consistently off, and it should still work like that. So if you measure the output, which is pin 3, you've got negative 28 volts. It goes through this resistor, and once it gets over here, now it's up to negative 33 because we've got negative 35 down here, and this is tied through a resistor there. All that to say, I think the 555 is working. So I'm going to test it with the scope. The output of this thing should be about 20 kilohertz. And so I have very carefully hooked up a probe to pin 3, which is the output. And it thinks it's at about 19 kilohertz. You do have a wave pattern, and it measures negative 28 volts. So in other words, I think that 555 is working just fine, people. Now, let me turn this off. I don't want to leave it on when things aren't working properly any longer than I have to. So when we get over here, instead of negative 25, we have negative 33. Right? Negative 35 here. Instead of negative 19 here, we have negative 21, which is a little weird because it's not 9 off, but whatever. Instead of negative 25 here, we have negative 35. Negative 35 here. We have 35 volts here instead of 24. And then on this side, we have negative 35 because it's pretty much tied to this bottom rail. And then up here, instead of negative 27, we have negative 35. Right? So I think it's all correct. Like, this says negative 27. And this down here is supposed to be negative 26, so that's like 1 volt higher, and it's, you know, it's not exact, but we're in the right ballpark. We're a negative number, right? Negative 35 here on the hot, instead of negative 27 here, negative 35, but that seems right. And then here we have 34 volts, which is also what we're getting on this line that feeds the B+, and then also what we're getting on the top. So at the beginning I said I didn't think it was the Zener diode. I'm starting to think it is. Keep in mind, you can't really test those things with a meter because Zener diodes work forward and backwards. Basically, it doesn't allow voltage through this way like a regular diode, except it does once it gets over 13 volts. Right? So the diode works both ways. With a diode, with a multimeter, you can only test it like a traditional diode. You can't test the Zener function of it. So that's a 150 volt Zener diode, and we can't test that with the meter. So it doesn't test as shorted, but it very well could be that diode's bad. So let's try swapping that out and see what we get. So there's the original one. Notice you can't tell anything's wrong with it. Now, whenever you do this, you got to be careful. The biggest mistake that people make is, see how it says ZD902? There is another one up here that is D902. That's just a regular diode. Right? They probably shouldn't have done that. Come on, people. Now, notice I've high watered it. I left it sticking way up in the air. That's because it's inside this cage, inside the monitor. Nobody's going to be in there messing with it. And if it's up in the air, you get a little more cooling going on. So there's no need to have it way down flat on the board. It doesn't help anything. The only reason you wouldn't want to do that is because if it's sticking up in the air, it'd be easier for it to get knocked around or something. But it's inside the monitor cage, and, you know, it's not an issue. All right, so we're going to try that and see if that gets us going. I think that might be it, but I probably just jinxed myself. I'm going to put it at 30%. There's a 30% chance that was it. It could be the hot as well, but the hot tests fine with a diode test, and you can test those usually with a diode test. So this is my best educated guess. All right, folks, same exact thing. We've got 33 volts here, and we've got 33 volts here. But we've got something else going on. These transistors feed this one, which is involved with the high voltage adjustment. Now, I would think that this is being used to adjust this voltage to keep it 150 volts below that voltage. And since this voltage is correct, I thought that this didn't really matter, that it would maybe adjust it a little bit, but it wouldn't make this voltage and this voltage be the same. However, I've got 35 volts here, 9 volts high, but I've also got 35 volts here, which should be 6, and I've got 35 volts here, which should be 7, right? So this should probably be 16, and that should probably be 16. But this transistor either isn't working or it's shorted. So that could definitely, I mean, it's obviously screwed up, so very easily could be the problem. So I'm going to check this one as well. This one appears to be correct with the exception of this, collector being 35 volts instead of 7. So I'm going to check this one as well. All right, folks, so these things are a nightmare to try to film. See how that looks pretty smooth? It's not flickering. See how that looks like it's flickering? It's not flickering. Here in person, it's not flickering. You see how it's out of focus and stuff now? These cameras do not do these vector monitors justice. If you've never played a color vector game, you just don't know what all the hype is about. The damn things are amazing. I mean, they're real bright and vivid. They're very colorful. It's just so cool and styled how the lines are drawn. But it's really hard to film the thing and make it look right. Especially me. You know, I'm not known for being high tech. See how that one looks? See how it looks pretty good there? That's how it looks the whole time. Okay? You're catching the refresh rate of it and stuff on the camera. There's nothing I can do, folks. It's just, it is what it is. Now, you might be saying, now, how did you fix the thing? Okay, so our buddy Matt came in. And Matt knows his way around an oscilloscope, you know. And so I said, hey, tell me if this 555 timer output looks pretty good. Maybe if I back it out a little bit. I said, hey, tell me if this 555 timer output looks pretty good. So we hooked the oscilloscope back up to it, and you saw earlier in the video the 555 output, and it was dead. Just completely missing. And he's like, oh yeah, that's your problem, the 555 is not running. I was like, but it was running. So we went back and watched the tape, and sure enough, it was running. So I don't know if it was on its last legs. He looked at the video from earlier, and to him, the signal didn't look very good. Like the way it was really thick on the top and everything, it didn't look like it should look, in his opinion. So what I did was I put a socket in, put yet another, or I put a 555 in it. And then while I was at it, I was looking at all of the transistors that we were checking, all those voltages and everything. I just went ahead and replaced all the small transistors because they're 2N3904, 2N3906, and MPS A06. Those are all like 20, 30 cent transistors. I think the A06 might be a little more, but those are the cheapest possible transistors you will ever see. So I keep those in stock. They're in all kinds of stuff. So I just went ahead and replaced them all, and I think there's 7 of them in the whole thing. And there was one Zener diode that I hadn't replaced yet, and it's the same story. I got plenty of those. They're cheap, so I just went ahead and replaced it. So it ended up I had replaced I think there's 4 Zener diodes, ZD900, ZD901, ZD902, and ZD903. Replaced all 4 of those. I replaced the 7 small transistors, the little nickel transistors, dime transistors. Checked all the other components. Everything seemed cool. Put in a new 555, which came right up. So I guess that would be my advice if you're rebuilding one. GRAVITAR is a really tough game. All these vector games are tough. I wish I could get that freaking thing to focus because you're not even going to be able to read it. Well, maybe you can read it. You see my problem, right? What if I zoom way in? Yeah, it doesn't get any better. See how that looks smooth? You get the point. GRAVITAR was the first color vector game that I ever owned. I got one from a gentleman, and we got a hell of a deal on it, and the monitor didn't work. And that was, so the first color vector Wells Gardner 6100 monitor that I ever fixed actually wasn't a GRAVITAR. So, I've probably worked on, maybe 20 of them at most. So I'm certainly not an expert on them. So I'll play it a little bit, but like I said, folks, it's hard as hell.
It'll take me a while to get used to what you're supposed to do. I can't even remember. There's thrust, there's fire. So this is kind of like asteroids, this part. Got you, sucker. Got you, sucker. See the white line that draws you back in? That's pretty cool. So, gravity is pulling me towards these planets. Right? See how I'm going around the sun or the moon or whatever that is? The star? And so anytime you get near one of these ships, you get in a dogfight. And then it draws you back in. That's so cool. This stuff's too cool for school. I guess I want to go to the one that's got the... I guess I want to go to the one that's got the lowest points because it'll be the easiest. Oh, I died. I went into the sun. I'm like Icarus. So let's try going over to this 2000 one. Oh, and you bounce off the edges. That's interesting to know. All right, so here we go. So if I go into this little planet, look, folks, I'm trying. Okay, so now you got to do the same thing, and the gravity is pulling you towards the ground the whole time. And it zooms you in. And if you get going too fast, it really screws you up. So you don't want to, like, well, I don't know what I'm doing, so don't take advice from me, but just the way I play it. See, if you get going too fast, you just wreck. So you gotta be careful. Fuel mission complete. Does that mean I should leave? Is that what they're saying? So maybe I leave? Oh yeah, okay. Look at them all hell-bent on fighting. You see that? They're troublemakers. Score fuel. Uh-oh, 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 uh-oh. And the gravity is different depending on what planet you're on. So after you mess with it a little bit, you know, you probably figure it out, but we'll try another game. Flunky list. Yeah, I flunked. Look at Matt. Look at Matt showing off. All right. All right. Let's try one more time. All right. What happens if you go real fast? Do you come in real fast? Oh no. You're good. You gotta be careful with that thrust. You gotta be careful, folks. Be careful, okay? Just watch what you're doing, all right? Whoa, wrong button. Mission complete. All right. Well, that's one way to do it. That's probably not the best way. All right, one more. It's an addictive game, folks. It's fun. Damn right I'm gonna put mine. Look, I'm getting the highest. Look, I got 2,000 points last time. Of course I'm gonna put my name in. I want to make sure everybody knows that I was number 1 and number 2. Most of them would just say I'm number 2. Look, folks, we're not supposed to say that on YouTube. Well, let's do this. Let's just skip that one planet so I can go get some practice on this planet. What do you think? Oh, that little point. Now, I should have knocked that off, and so now it can't get me, but this game's not very realistic. Yeah, that's right. All right, on to the next one. So now the dog fight begins. Oh, they got me. Ooh, I got them. What? What? Oh, hell, this is just satanic. They pull you different, too, it seems like, depending on which planet you're on. All right, folks, so there you go. I'm not going to get any better, all right? It's just not going to happen. But there you are. That's walking through a Wells Gardner 6100 a little bit. I hope you enjoyed it. If you didn't see our previous video where we worked through all of the power supply, there was nothing wrong with it, but we showed you how to check all of the power all the way through. We hooked it up on a scope so you could see the game playing on the scope. That's how we knew it was definitely something in the monitor. Go check that out. I'll put it up right there. We'll see you on the next video. Hey, don't forget to check out my brother Donnie. He has a really cool channel here on YouTube. The link's down below. I'm over there with him a lot of the times. We just started working on a new mobile home. So we'll see you over there. Check out this video.